No matter how many times I read The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien, there's this one scene that's always a gut punch. If you know the story well, you might already be imagining the part that I'm talking about. The traveling companions, the Fellowship of the Ring, enter into the mines of Moria, and there awakens a great evil. They're chased by orcs through the mines until they come to this bridge, the bridge of Khazad-dûm. And this greater evil, the drum beats that they had heard coming, approaching, growing ever closer, finally arrives. It's the Balrog. The Balrog is this great, ancient, evil demigod, demon, monster. And Gandalf, the wizard and leader of the company, stops and faces the Balrog while the rest of the company runs ahead over the bridge. And there's a great standoff between the two, the Balrog and Gandalf. And Gandalf, mustering all of his might with a great spell, casts the best of his magic. And the Balrog topples off the bridge and starts to fall, tumbling into the abyss. And just when everybody is breathing a sigh of relief that the danger is past, just then, the Balrog's fire whip snaps, catches Gandalf on the ankle, and pulls him to the edge. He's grasping for dear life, and all he has is a moment to turn to his friends and say, "Fly, fools," before he follows the Balrog into the darkness. And his companions do fly. They run, carrying with them the grief of this great unexpected loss. And in that moment, too, every time I read the story, my heart breaks. And it's so strange, because even though I know how the story ends, I don't believe it. It doesn't make any sense. But every time when I'm reading that place in the story, I think, this time will be different. I don't believe the spoiler that I already know what happens next. I say it'll be different this time, somehow. I don't know what spell I have to cast, but with all of my heart and all of my mind, I want it to be different. We're going to put that meditation on spoilers and that impulse to hope against all hope for a different outcome. We're going to put that on a bookshelf, and we'll return to it later. Because there's another gut punch that I think about on Good Friday, and it appears in the scripture that we heard. It's the voice of the crowd. The crowd that says, "Away with him! Crucify him! He's no king of ours!" They condemn him to death. And most Good Fridays, it puts me in a mind of being an individual who is a part of the crowd, who has the same propensity to participate in that great evil. But this year I'm in a different space. Maybe it's the fact that I've been paying attention to the news in a different and more personally invested way. But I'm thinking about the systems of evil, about the way that beyond all of us, there is a crowd that is a character, that's no one individual person, even as we participate in it, but it's greater than all of us. It's no one person. It's the crowd. And the crowd is crying, "Away with him. Crucify him." And the fact of the matter is, we tell this story remembering this particular instance, but the truth of the matter is that there are these voices of death and crucifixion that are at work in our lives, in the world. I'll give you a personal example to start to flesh out what I mean. I suspect, talking to clergy colleagues, that it's normal for new priests to have a sense of imposter syndrome after one has been ordained. This sense of like, I'm a priest? I'm a priest? I'm a priest? But it surprised me since my ordination. There's another voice that I hear that I never anticipated. A voice that I haven't thought about in 20 years. And it's not until I started standing behind that altar that I started to hear it. Many of you may know that I was raised Catholic. Actually, my faith was nurtured and formed just down the street at St. Peter's and Paul's Roman Catholic Church. And 90% of my memories there are warm and good. But I was a good Catholic girl, a devout Catholic girl. And even as St. Peter and Paul's had a children's service and invited the children up around the altar, and we got to see the Eucharistic prayer up close and in action, there was a line drawn around the altar, and I was not invited to stand behind it, being a girl. And when my teenage rebellion took me out of the Catholic Church and I found myself in a conservative Pentecostal church, there was a similar barrier. The lines weren't quite as explicit, but women pastors had a question mark behind it. Not everyone was too sure about what that meant, if it was scriptural. And then when I went to college, a small Christian college, even though the Christian Ministries department was really supportive, it was a mixed bag among the students. And I got some pushback from fellow colleagues in school. And it's funny, because even though I have not been exposed to those voices in 20 years, I didn't even believe them 20 years ago. I worked at the Women in Ministry office. I went to Women in Ministry conferences when I was in college. But I was talking to a friend of mine recently about these struggles. They were trying to help me get to the root of the matter. And I was saying, like, I stand behind the altar and I feel like I don't belong here. I hear a voice that says, you're not a real priest because you're not a man. My friend said, well, is it the rector? No. No. Is it the staff? Are they giving you pushback? No. What about the congregation? No. No, my ministry is affirmed and supported and encouraged. And yet, I have that voice. It's the voice of death. It's the voice of crucifixion. It's the voice of less than. It's the voice that you're not good enough. Whatever you're called to do, this is my story, but I suspect, being human, you might have your own voices that deal death, that say for whatever reason you're not good enough. Maybe you heard it from family or your community or your culture or the world, that there's something deeply wrong with you that's not worthy for you to stand on your own 2 feet and live into the dignity and mystery and love that God calls us to. And the funny thing is, I can't remember a single person that told me that I wasn't good enough for ministry. There's no single voice. It was all the voices. Just in the culture I was growing up, it was the voice of the crowd. It was the voice of the crowd. And that voice exists in the world. And I just gave a personal example, but I can think of a million, and I bet you can too. This gospel according to John that we read every Good Friday is powerful and moving, and also it has been used by Christians. Instead of being a gateway into our own interrogation of our own selves, Christians for centuries have used the gospel according to John to put the blame of Jesus' death on the Jews, to turn them into the crucified ones. And there have been individuals that have used the passage in that way, but it's also been the crowd. It's been the culture. It's not the fault of one person. It's everyone. I think, too, for a more modern example, of the voices that cry, "Crucify," to this beautiful earth that we call home. No one here wants to destroy it. But there are systems in place that strip the earth of its resources. And of course, it's so easy to listen in terror to the news of the growing climate crisis, to hear the voices that cry, "Crucify," and to stand at the cross and take a good, hard look at death. It's terrifying. It's terrifying, especially if you have little ones in your life that you love, but it's terrifying for anybody. But we can come back to the bookshelf and revisit our relationship with spoilers. Because even as I read The Fellowship of the Rings and wanted the story to end differently, I believe the church, at its best, is a community of hope. A community that hopes against hope. A community that says, this is how it looks like the story will end. But it's not the end. And I did not tell the whole story of The Fellowship of the Rings because I didn't want to spoil it for those of you who haven't read it yet. And those of you who have know that the story continues. The story does not end on that bridge. It's not what I hope for as I read it, but the story continues. And our story continues in the face of all the voices that deal death and cry crucifixion. The story continues. It's a little bit like if you've ever run into traffic on the highway and wondered, like, what's going on? And discover as you're driving that something has fallen off a load, right, from a truck, let's say a mattress, right? And the mattress is in the middle of the highway and everyone's rubbernecking. And really what has to happen is one person has to stop. One person has to stop, get out of their car, and pull the mattress out of the side of the road. And on Good Friday, we remember that somebody did stop. That somebody did stop the traffic. That said, this has to end. The crowds that cried, "Crucify," do not have the last word, but I will not meet violence with violence. But that one individual that died on this day opens the way so that we are not alone. It is not just one of us, but it's all of us that are called to the way. I would feel really hopeless some days, especially after having my daughter, about the climate crisis and what to do in the face of it. And then I remembered that the church has been waiting for and talking about the end of the world since its inception. And I'm not saying that we expect God will just come and make everything okay. I don't have a lot of patience for that theology as I get older. Because really, the early church had an existential crisis at its beginning. They were expecting Jesus to come back any day in their lifetimes. But they had to wait. The cross was there, and they had to wait. They didn't know how the story would end. They knew that the death was not the end of the story, is what they knew. The waiting was not the end of the story. And it's not that we just wait for God to fix things, but actually we are hoping against hope, and that hope empowers us to go out into the world and do something. Because we know that death does not have the last word. This is not the end of the story. We know that on Good Friday. We know that in our own lives. That God is calling forth a new creation, even as we stand at the foot of the cross, in the face of all the voices that cry, "Crucify." They don't have the last word. They don't. We hope against all hope. We don't believe the spoilers. We wait. We watch. We act, following the one who has led the way. Amen.